The girl had not eaten in 2 days, and she was not the hungry one who mattered. Thea Merrivale, 23 years old, stood at the edge of the Anchor Bar Ranch's home corral, with dust on her boots, and her brother's weight leaning against her shoulder, and she said the only sentence she had left in her. "Give me any work. My brother is starving. I'll do anything you've got, so long as there's food in it." The man she said it to was not the rancher. He was the segundo, the ranch's foreman, a broad-shouldered 34-year-old named Weston Thorncroft, and he had been checking a gelding's shoe when the words hit him like a dropped horseshoe. He looked past her at the young man swaying on his feet, Roland Merrivale, 19, cheeks hollowed out, eyes too bright in a face gone the color of old tallow, and Weston Thorncroft did not need to be told twice what he was looking at. He had seen that face before. He had worn it himself, once, a long time ago. "Sit him down in the shade first," Weston said. "Then we'll talk about work." That sentence would change 3 lives before the season was out, though none of them knew it yet. The Merrivale homestead, 40 miles north in the dry country above the Truckee benchlands of Nevada, had failed the way so many failed in those years, not all at once, but in a slow unraveling that took 2 full seasons to finish, 2 summers without enough rain, a well that dropped lower every August until it dropped for good. Their mother, Thea Merrivale, had died of a fever the winter Thea was 16, peaceful in her sleep with both children at her bedside. Their father, Elias Merrivale, had held the place together 3 more years on stubbornness alone, walking the dry fields at dawn, as though staring at them hard enough might call the water back. It was Elias who did not wake up one March morning, worn through in the quiet way exhausted men sometimes are, his heart simply finished with the effort. He went peacefully, in his sleep, and Thea had always been glad of that much, that the land had taken everything else from him, but not that. What the land took after that was the deed itself. The tax collector was patient but not infinite, and by the following spring, the Merrivale homestead belonged to a bank in Carson City, and Thea and Roland belonged to the road. They had walked 3 days to reach Anchor Bar, living on what Thea could beg or trade along the way, giving what little there was to Roland first, always to Roland first, until there was nothing left to give herself. By the time they reached Sylvester Croom's gate, Roland could barely stand, and Thea's plea to the foreman was not desperation dressed up as a request. It was the plain truth, spoken as plainly as she had breath to speak it. Weston got them both settled at the cook fire, put bread and beans into Roland's hands before anything else was said, and watched the young man's fingers shake too hard to hold the spoon properly. Thea took it from him without a word and fed her brother herself, one careful mouthful at a time, the way a person feeds someone they have been keeping alive, through nothing but sheer refusal to let go. It was there that Sylvester Croom found them. Croom was 54, cattle wealthy and iron plain, and the rule he ran his outfit by was carved into him as deep as any brand. "I don't hire what can't already pull its weight." He said it to every drifter who came asking, every hard-luck story that showed up at his gate during roundup season, looking for a soft berth and easy pay. He had said it so many times, it had worn a groove in him, and the groove had a story behind it, though he told that part to no one. His own father, Micah Croom, had built the first 100 acres of what became Anchor Bar, with a generous hand and a soft heart, feeding every stranded traveler and hiring every hard-luck man who asked, certain that goodness bred goodness in return. It had bred, instead, 3 seasons of drifters who ate his food, drew his wages, and vanished before the branding was finished, and a pair of smooth-talking brothers who borrowed heavily against his good name and left him holding notes he could never make good. Micah Croom died with the ranch nearly lost beneath him, worn down by shame more than sickness, peaceful in the end but broken long before it. Sylvester had rebuilt the outfit stone by stone out of that wreckage, and he had built the rebuilding on one unbending law: nobody ate at Anchor Bar who had not first proven they could earn the plate. He looked at the girl feeding her brother by the fire and felt the old groove tighten. "Thorncroft," he said, "we don't run a poorhouse." "Wasn't asking you to," Weston said, standing. "She asked for work. I've got a camp short a cook since Amos took his leg injury bad, and I've got calving season with more hands needed than I've got hands to spare. She cooks, she mends, and once the boy's fed up proper, he'll likely be worth 2 ordinary hands, the way boys raised on a failing homestead usually are. I aim to hire her. You want to fire me for it, that's your right." It was as close to defiance as Weston Thorncroft had ever offered his employer, and it surprised them both. Croom studied him a long moment, studied the girl, the swaying boy, the stubborn set of his foreman's jaw, and said only, "Their food comes out of her wages. And if the boy can't work inside 2 weeks, they're both gone." Then he turned and walked off toward the house, and that was as much permission as anyone was going to get. Weston had not told Croom the reason he'd pushed so hard, because it belonged to a version of himself he rarely spoke of. When he was 12, his own family had walked a road much like the one Thea and Roland had just come down, turned away from 3 separate outfits during a drought year because his father, sick already and slowing, could not prove he'd pull his weight. It was a stranger cowhand at a 4th ranch, a man who owed the Thorntons nothing, who had quietly put Weston's mother to work at the cook fire without making her beg or prove a thing first, and fed the family 3 months running until his father was strong enough to work the spring gather himself. His father lived another 11 years after that, long enough to see Weston grown, and died at last peacefully in his own bed of old age. But Weston never forgot the particular shape of the kindness that had bought those 11 years. Kindness that cost the giver nothing to offer, and everything to a family that received it. He had spent every year since trying to be that stranger cowhand for somebody else, whenever the chance came around. Thea Merrivale did not know any of this. She only knew that a broad-shouldered foreman had looked at her starving brother and decided, without asking her to explain herself twice, that they were worth the trouble. She would spend the whole roundup season proving he'd been right to decide it. The camp cook's job at Anchor Bar during spring gather was no soft berth. Thea rose before the hands did and fed 22 men 3 times a day out of a chuck wagon stocked thinner than she would have liked, stretching beans and salt pork and hardtack into meals that left grown men satisfied and never once let on how carefully she was counting what remained in the flour sack. She had learned to cook on a dying homestead where nothing could be wasted, and it turned out that skill translated almost exactly to feeding a working outfit through a hard season. Within a week, the hands were calling her cooking better than anything Amos had managed in 3 years, and within 2, nobody at Anchor Bar remembered to ask why Croom had let her stay. There was a night, early on, when one of the older hands, a leathery rider named Dutch Holland, who had seen every kind of hard-luck story come through a bunkhouse door, muttered over his plate that the outfit didn't need charity cases slowing down a working gather. Thea heard it, said nothing, and simply set a second helping in front of him without comment. She did the same the next night, and the night after that, until Dutch Holland stopped muttering and started, without ever quite admitting it, saving her the best cuts of firewood from his own pile each morning before she rose. It was the kind of quiet truce ranch people made all the time, settled in gestures instead of apologies, and nobody ever called it anything but ordinary. Roland recovered slower, but he recovered. The first few days he could do little more than mend harness sitting down, his hands shaking too badly for anything requiring strength. Thea watched him with her jaw tight, and her eyes wet more nights than she let anyone see. But food and rest are patient medicine, and by the second week Roland Merrivale was standing straighter, eating a full man's portion, and asking Weston for real work instead of the easy chores he'd been given out of mercy. Weston gave it to him, fence mending first, then night herding. Then, when it became clear the boy had a gift for reading cattle that no amount of teaching could account for, a permanent place among the riders. Roland worked like a man repaying a debt he intended to clear in full, because that was exactly what he believed he was doing. He never asked for anything beyond his wages. He never once mentioned the 2 days he had not eaten so his sister could. But work alone would not be what finally moved Sylvester Croom. It happened in the 4th week, during a flash flood that came down Antelope Wash without warning on a night when half the outfit was strung out along the creek bottom, moving cattle to higher pasture. Croom himself was caught in it. His horse, spooked at the sudden roar of water, threw him against a boulder and left him half drowned and badly broken in the leg, pinned against a cut bank with the water still rising around him and no one close enough to hear him call. It was Roland who found him, hazing a knot of strays back from the wash when lightning showed him the shape of a man pressed against the bank. He did not stop to ask whose employer he was pulling free of the current. He simply did it, wrestling Croom onto the saddle in front of him and getting them both to solid ground before the water climbed any higher. He carried Croom 3 miles back to the home ranch through driving rain, and Thea, roused from the chuck wagon, spent the rest of that night setting the broken leg by lamplight with hands that did not shake, cleaning wounds and holding cold cloths to a fevered brow until dawn, exactly as carefully as she had once nursed her own dying homestead's hopes, exactly as carefully as she had fed her starving brother 1 spoonful at a time. She did it for a man who had told his foreman, in her hearing, that he did not run a poorhouse. She did it without being asked. She did it expecting nothing back. Croom lay abed, 3 weeks mending, and in all that time he watched the 2 of them from his window, the girl who owed him nothing pausing at his door, twice a day with broth she'd made thinner for herself so there'd be enough for him, the boy who'd pulled him from the wash, going straight back out, to do a full day's riding, without a word of the rescue to anyone, as though saving his employer's life had simply been the next chore on a list. Nobody at Anchor Bar was told to be grateful to Sylvester Croom for anything. Nobody performed a debt in front of him. They simply kept doing the work, and kept setting aside a share for him, the way they had clearly always done for each other, long before he had any part in it. It was the plain, unasked-for shape of it that finally reached him. His father's ruin had come from strangers who took kindness and gave nothing back. What lay in front of him now was the opposite of that entirely. 2 people who had asked for nothing but the chance to earn their keep, and who gave far more than was owed the moment owing stopped being the question. The old rule cracked before Croom ever said a word about it. When he was well enough to stand at the porch rail during the branding week gathering, with most of the outfit present, Sylvester Croom said the thing he had never once said in 30 years of running Anchor Bar. "I built my rule on men who took what they didn't earn," he said, plain and rough, looking at no one in particular and everyone at once. "I never once made room in it for the difference between a beggar and a worker. These 2 taught me that difference the hard way, and I mean to spend the rest of my years making up for how long I took to learn it." He did not weep in front of them, being the kind of man who wouldn't, but his voice caught once, on the word learn, and every hand present understood exactly what it cost him to say it. He gave Roland Merrivale a permanent rider's contract with a share in the spring calf crop, the first such offer he had made to any hand in a decade. He deeded Thea the small cook's cabin outright, told her Anchor Bar's kitchen was hers for as long as she wanted it, and quietly doubled the wage Weston had first offered her, back paid to her first day. He never called it charity, because it was not charity. It was payment, at last, for something he had been receiving all season and had been too proud to see. Weston Thorncroft watched all of it from the corral fence with a look on his face Thea had learned, by then, to recognize, the look of a man who had been waiting a long while to see somebody else understand what he had understood since he was 12 years old. When the gathering broke up, he found her by the chuck wagon and did not make a speech of it, because that was not his way either. "Your father would have been proud of the both of you," he said. "I expect I am too, for what that's worth." "It's worth a good deal," Thea said, coming from the man who fed us first and asked questions later. They married the following spring, in the yard of the Anchor Bar ranch house, with the whole outfit standing witness, Roland giving his sister away with a steadiness in his hands that had not been there a year before. Croom gave them, as a wedding gift, the deed to 40 acres along a spring-fed creek at the edge of his range, enough ground for a modest herd of their own, ground with water that would not fail the way the Merrivale homesteads had. He never spoke of the gift as an apology, and neither Thea nor Weston ever asked him to. Some debts are better settled in silence than in speeches. Roland stayed on as a rider at Anchor Bar another 6 years before taking a foreman's post of his own on a neighboring outfit, well known by then across 3 counties as a man who could read cattle and weather better than most men twice his age, and better known still for a habit that puzzled newer hands until they understood its history. He never once, in 40 years of ranch work, turned away a hungry traveler from a cook fire without at least offering them a plate first and a chance to earn the next one. He kept, all his life, a single item from the old homestead, a plain wooden ladle his father Elias had whittled by hand the winter before the well finally failed, worn smooth from years of stirring thin soup into something that had to stretch far enough for 2. Roland used it at his own outfit's chuck wagon until the day he died, an old man by then, peacefully, surrounded by grandchildren who had grown up hearing the story of the ladle and what it had once had to stretch to cover. Thea told that story herself for 60 years, at her own kitchen table at the little spring-fed place she and Weston built out from that first 40 acres into something considerably larger, though never so large they forgot what it had felt like to have nothing. She told it to her children, and then to her grandchildren, and she always ended it the same way, with the same plain sentence she had once said to a stranger foreman at a corral fence, worn now into something gentler than desperation, but no less true for the years between. "I only ever asked for work," she would say. "It was the cowboy who decided nobody at his fire would go hungry again, and he never once let either of us forget we'd earned our place at it."